Okay, well, welcome to SILL again. I think we have a very interesting talk in store for us. A few quick announcements. The usual cell phone one. If you have it on, please turn it off or put it on vibrate. Thank you very much for that. Let me just preview about what the next group of SILL lectures, especially since one is in a different time schedule. So we have today's talk, which Lori Porter will, what's that? Okay, all right, that better, okay, good, and thank you. The next talk after this one is on May 5th about Kurdistan, and that should be somewhat topical these days. And then the next one is not on a Thursday, but it's on May 13th, which is Friday the 13th, unfortunately. 100 Years of Humiliation, a Portal into Understanding Modern China. And I think that's certainly very relevant today. And then the last talk of our spring series is on May 19th, the 9th Amendment. So that's the upcoming talks we'll have. So without further ado, let me introduce Lori Porter, who will introduce our speaker.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? A little bit closer. Today, our guest speaker is Dr. Curtis Marion, the Foundation Professor in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change and the Associate Director of the Institute of Human Origins at Arizona State University. He is particularly interested in the relation between climate and environmental change and human evolution, both for its significance as a force driving past human evolution and as a challenge we face today and in the future. He has spent over 30 years doing field work in Africa and conducting laboratory work on field collected materials with the goal of illuminating the final stages of human evolution. How modern humans became modern. His fieldwork is focused in Africa and spans Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and is now focused on coastal ecosystems in South Africa. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marion to Sagewood.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I'm going to use this mic since I walk around a little bit. And thank you, Lori, for inviting me to come up to this beautiful place. I come up here regularly because I'm a big fan of music. And I normally bring guests that come here to the MIM and attend a lot of the concerts up here. So you got a great spot. Very nice. A couple of things, you know, I'm at the Institute of Human Origins. We just moved into a new building at ASU. We had a building opening on Tuesday, board of directors meeting yesterday. So it's been very, very busy for us. We've got a beautiful signature space. So if you're ever on campus, come by and see us. We have exhibits on human origins in the Institute, and you can come up and see the exhibits. And you can also, some of the labs have windows where you can look in and see the scientists doing their thing with bones and stones and so on. So please come and say hello if you ever come to that area to visit. I hold a position at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa in a unit that I helped create with my colleague and friend Richard Cowling. He's a world-renowned botanist on coastal vegetation, Mediterranean vegetation. We named it the African Center for Coastal Paleoscience. So we built it from scratch, and the whole idea is to create a transdisciplinary research unit in Africa that can train African scientists to go forward with the kind of transdisciplinary perspectives that really have been focused on at ASU. That's kind of one of our signature characteristics. And I put the two magazine articles that I've written. The one called Secrets of Our Success was published in 2010. And this one, How We Conquered the Planet, 2015. These were general public articles I've written to explain the science that we've done and my ideas about its significance. So if you have interest in this material, you can go dig those out. I can also email them to you if you want to get in contact with Lori, and I might have emailed them to you already. But they're written for the general public, so not a lot of technical jargon in them, and they've been very popular. They've been very highly downloaded and so on. And really they form the basis of my talk today. So you could brush up on the talk if after I give it if you wanted to. But what I'm going to do is, of course, update you on the information that was in those articles, because one of the things that's happening in human evolutionary studies is that things are changing very rapidly. We're learning an enormous amount at very rapid pace. And this has to do with the fact that a lot of the technology has advanced enormously. So our ability to date things precisely has just skyrocketed in quality. But also I'd say that one of the biggest impacts is evolutionary genetics, right? So we're now able to extract, really fragmented pieces of DNA from ancient bones, and then using very high-powered computers and software rebuild that DNA to more complete DNA chains. That tells us a lot about the evolutionary history of the organisms. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that has impacted our work today. So on this slide, I call it the modern human origins biological story. Okay, so with one slide, I'm going to try to update you on 100 years of research. And this slide, I've been using this slide for 20 years. And every time I give a talk, I give a lot of talks. Every time I give a talk, I have to update it. That's how fast things are changing, okay? So on that bottom panel, that's in thousands of years. So when you're over here, it's 800,000 years ago, okay? So we kind of think of that as the later part of human origins. Now, how many people have heard of Lucy, the fossil Lucy? Okay, the most famous fossil ever, right? A lot of other fossils have been named and people have hoped to knock Lucy off her pedestal, but it's never happened. It's still the most famous fossil. That was found by Don Johanson, and he is the founding director of the Institute of Human Origins, where I'm at. That's at 3.4 million. So it's way, way, way down here. Those fossils, Lucy's important because it told us about when and how humans evolved upright walking, bipedal mobility. But what I'm interested in is how we became like us, modern humans, this species that has reshaped the planet in ways that are not all that productive, as we're finding out right now, right? And that story really, in my opinion, begins about 800,000 years ago. And you have two panels here. The lower panel is a record for global temperature change, okay? And that's extracted from ice cores in Antarctica. And the delta deuterium is a record of climate change. And when that black line is up in that reddish color, that's when the Earth is warm. And we call that an interglacial. And when that line is down in the blue, the world is cold, what we call a glacial. And obviously we're in an interglacial right now, and we're driving the temperature up really fast. That's the problem. The world has undergone lots of temperature changes, but what's happening now is we're driving temperature up at a pace faster than it's ever changed, right? That's the big problem because ecology doesn't have a chance to adapt. It's happening too quickly. But your take-home message here is, for the majority of the last 800,000 years, the world has been in a glacial phase, not an interglacial. So all the environments that you see around you today would have been wildly different during the majority of the later phases of human evolution, okay? And we're going to come back to the climate thing. And then the top, I've taken the record for later human evolution and I've simplified it to what is called on top a Eurasian archaic lineage and at the bottom an African archaic lineage. And I'm going to add more lines. And when those lines end in a circle, that means extinction. And when they end in an arrow, that means still alive with us today. Okay? So what you're seeing here is around 800,000 years ago, there was one lineage of early humans, what we call hominids, one lineage. And then around 700,000 years ago, it starts to diverge into two lineages, a Eurasian lineage and an African lineage. Okay, simple. And then from around 700,000 years ago to around 400,000 years ago, there's gene flow between these two lineages, which keeps them looking similar. Okay, that gene flow. So what that means is early humans are probably moving in and out of Africa and Eurasia, and that causes the gene flow. And then around 400,000 years ago, that gene flow gets cut. And it probably gets cut by the formation of the Sahara Desert, which makes it difficult for people to get in and out of Africa, right? Because it's super dry and hominids can't get across it. But what happens when you cut gene flow is the lineages begin to evolve away from each other. They become different. And that's the origin point of a big split, very important split in human evolution. And then after that, we start to see a number of lineages evolve. And the Denisovan lineage is a group of early humans that lived in Eastern Asia. And we learned about them about a decade ago by first discovering their ancient DNA in a fossil bone in a cave in Russia called Denisova. Okay, so if you can keep that in your mind, you've got this human evolving in Eastern Asia, and we call them Denisovans. And then there was another lineage that evolved called Neanderthals. And I'm sure, you know, how many people have heard of Neanderthals? Of course, right? Of course. We know a lot about Neanderthals. And Neanderthals were evolving in Western Eurasia, right? Europe. We have over 200 skeletons of Neanderthals. We have the entire Neanderthal genome sequenced. So we know a lot. So now in your mind, Denisovans in Eastern Asia, Neanderthals in Western Eurasia. And as that was happening, the modern human lineage evolved in Africa. And notice that's the only one with an arrow, right? All the others eventually go extinct. And we have fossils and genetic evidence that that lineage, the modern human lineage, appeared in Africa sometime between about 200,000 and 150,000 years ago, okay? And that lineage leads to everybody alive on the planet today. We're all descended from that lineage in Africa. So when you hear human evolutionists like me say, we're all Africans, that's what we mean by that. We're all descended from that population. And a small group of those early modern humans, those Africans, left Africa about 120,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. But we called it a failed exit because they didn't go very far. they probably were stuck in the Middle East. And there they met Neanderthals and interbred with them, such that Neanderthals picked up some DNA of Africans. So when we sequence the DNA of our Neanderthal cousins, we can see a little piece of modern human African DNA. Okay, but that was a failed exit. Neanderthals held their ground at that point. But then there's a successful exit, and that happens about 70,000 years ago. And a small group of modern humans, Africans, left Africa at that point, probably through Egypt and into Israel, and then out, right? And that creates the two lineages that are with us on the planet today, Eurasians and Africans. And all Eurasians, doesn't matter where you are from in Europe or Asia or whatever, Australia, Papua New Guinea, Japan, you're descended from that small population of Africans that left Africa. Okay, that's what we call a founder population. And when they left, they met Neanderthals, and they interbred with Neanderthals such that every Eurasian on the planet today has a chunk of Neanderthal DNA in them. And that can vary from 2 to 5%, okay? And picked up traits from Neanderthals. And we're learning what those traits are. Some of those traits were adaptive, right? They stuck and they probably provided some advantage. That's why they're there. And then there's this wild proliferation of lineages, right? As modern humans are leaving Africa, they're spreading out and they're evolving new languages and so on and so forth. And the lineages that currently today are the indigenous people of Papua New Guinea and Australia met Denisovans, interbred with them, and they have Denisovan DNA in their genomes. So the indigenous people of Papua New Guinea and Australia have both Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, but Europeans don't have Denisovan. You see what I'm saying? So if you notice, they're all extinct, but there are extinct cousins, but we have clues about them in our genomes. And those are genes that do things. And we're figuring out what those things are that they did. And then what's really interesting is after the exit out of Africa, you can see, you probably didn't see it pop on, but I just put this little arrow here. There were still archaic humans in Africa, and they interbred with modern Africans, such that modern Africans picked up a little archaic DNA. So the take-home message is we only have one species of human on the planet today, us, modern humans. But we all have bits and pieces of our ancient cousins that, what in science we call it introgression. We're introgressed into our genomes from interbreeding with those other species. Okay? So the other interesting thing is all modern humans have very narrow genetic diversity. So to give you an idea, if you went to even one group of chimpanzees in Africa, that group has more genetic diversity than all humans on the planet. And that's because this event right here was a small population of people, probably living in one area in Africa. So in other words, all modern humans are descended from Africans, and all modern humans are descended from a small population that probably lived in one region in Africa. Follow me on that, right? That's really interesting. We want to know what that region is, right? And I've argued it's South Africa. And I have good reasons for that, which I'm going to talk about. but that's why I'm doing, my field work has been based there for 30 years. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on that climate record. And again, this scale is thousands of years, right? So these are glacial phases and those are interglacial phases. So what I just to kind of summarize what I said is that modern humans, the modern human lineage appeared during this glacial phase from 200 to about 130,000 years ago. We call it marine isotope stage 6. Okay, stage 6. Very hard glacial phase. That's when our lineage appeared. And during that phase, this is a vegetation reconstruction of Africa. And during that phase, Africa is very cold and dry, such that the big deserts that you have in Africa today would be 2 to 3 times the size they are. And the Central African rainforest, for the most part, is gone. It's only little zones, what we call refugia. And what I've argued, and most people agree with this, is that during this phase, there's probably 5 or 6 places where humans could live in Africa. North Africa, the mountains in Ethiopia, and some of these vegetation zones in Central Africa and South Africa. And most likely, one gives rise to everybody alive on the planet today. Remember, I was saying the origin population is small, and it's probably in one zone. And I think it was there. Okay. Now, why the South African coast? The reason is, and there's lots of, I'm not going to get into all the details, but there are characteristics of that area that during cold phases would have provided a lot of food for people, a lot of food, where the other areas would not have been as productive. And those 3 kinds of foods that would have been super productive are intertidal shellfish, coastal resources, underground storage organ plants. That's a Khoisan Bushman woman digging up root crops, and a rich Pleistocene fauna, zebra, wildebeest. So you have this kind of triumvirate of resources during a glacial phase that would have allowed the populations to be healthy, productive, and so on, where those other areas would not have had this. Okay, so my argument is modern humans evolved on the coast of South Africa because of the rich resource base during harsh glacial cycles. Okay. Okay, so now, if you remember, we had a failed exit out of Africa. That failed exit dates to this interglacial phase around 120,000 years ago. And the reason an interglacial is a good time to get out of Africa is because during interglacials, rainfall in Africa is higher, and the Sahara would have been a grassland. So it's a grassland, right? Lots of water. We have hippo and crocodile fossils from the Sahara. People would have just walked in and out. Okay, so but it was a failed exit. It didn't stick. And then, so that, people would have been all over Africa and easily exiting. But the successful exit happened during a glacial phase, right? This is the interglacial of the failed exit. The successful exit happened during a harsh climate cycle. We don't know why people left Africa at that point and why that was a successful exit. Why wasn't it successful at 110? Why was it only successful at 70? And I'm going to build an argument because I think I know why. And I'll present that argument through this talk. I'll build the reasoning behind it, okay? So what does that exit look like? We call it the Great Human Diaspora. In my opinion, it's the most important event that's ever happened on our planet because it resulted in us spreading all over the planet, but it also resulted in us shaping the planet in a way that we're finding out now wasn't so great. Okay, so 70,000 years ago, modern humans leave Africa. They make it to Australia by 65,000 years ago. It's almost a blink of the eye, right? A rapid expansion. And in the process, there's megafaunal extinctions along the way. So as modern humans make their way out, species are going extinct and Denisovans go extinct, right? Our sister hominids. When modern humans get there, they interbreed with them, but those Denisovans disappear. They go extinct. We make it into Western Europe 45,000 years ago. And I think if I came back 5 years from now and gave this talk, I think that number's going back in time. I think it's going to go back to 60. There's some evidence, we can talk about it in the question and answer if you want to. Modern humans make it into Western Europe at least by 45,000 years ago. And guess what happens? 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals are extinct. And other big species are gone too. So everywhere we go, our cousins go extinct. And other big animals also go extinct. We make it into the Arctic by 45,000 years ago. Get stuck there for a little while. And then at least by 14,000 years ago, modern humans make it into North America. They make it all the way to the tip of South America by 13,500 years ago, right? A blink of an eye. But we have new evidence from New Mexico. I don't know if you saw it in the news, from White Sands area, where they found footprints of humans that date to 22,000, 23,000. So that's evidence we got there a little bit earlier. And what happens? A megafaunal extinction event. I don't know if you know this, but in North America, 15,000, 16,000 years ago, there were mammoth, mastodon, zebra, lions, cheetah, all went extinct when modern humans came into this zone. So let me leave you with kind of something just to think about, okay? How many people like Star Trek? I don't know. I love Star Trek. And of course, every once in a while, one of the themes is they're observing another species evolving, right? And the prime directive is you don't mess with that species. But let's imagine an alien species comes and visits, right? And they look down on the planet 200,000 years ago, and they see a number of different species of mammal. They're kind of interesting. They have fire, they make tools, they throw spears. But, to a spacefaring species, it's like, that's not very interesting, right? And off they go. And then they come back, 100,000 years ago. And the one in Africa is starting to do some interesting things, and the ones in Eurasia, not so interesting. But still Stone Age people. Okay, we're out of here. Then they come back around 40,000 years ago. And something interesting has happened. The one in Africa has left Africa. It's penetrated all the other environments on the planet except Antarctica. All the other humans are extinct. And it's evolving very rapidly. Its populations are growing and so on. They go, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. But they're still Stone Age. We'll come back later and have a look. So then they come back today. And that species has built cities, destroyed the ecology of the planet. And now it's coming out into space, into their neighborhood. Well, I can tell you, if I was captain of that alien spaceship, I would turn my phasers up to 11 and I'd smoke that planet. Right? Because that species, everywhere they go, their competitors seem to go extinct. I'd take them out now when I had the opportunity. Right? That's why I named that paper in Scientific American the most invasive species. You know, we were always talking about invasive ants and so on, and oh, you know, concerted effort, we can stomp them all out. But they're not the most invasive species. We are. We get into places, we eliminate our competitors, we shape the environment to our bidding, right? And some things can go horribly wrong when that happens. Okay. So I want to now shift to how and why did it happen? Right, I want to address that question. Why 70,000 years ago did something happen that modern humans burst out of Africa and rapidly spread across the planet? And I've written a theory for why that happens. And I've published it in scientific papers, okay? And then I've written about it to the general public in that article, The Most Invasive Species, and How We Conquered the Planet. So modern humans, and this is what we work on scientifically, have three traits that are unique to us as mammals. And the one that's obvious, you know, the most about is the advanced cognition, right? Our analytical abilities. But that's not the only one. We talk a lot about that, but there are two others that are actually equally significant. We have a psychology for a special form of social learning. Modern human children expect to be taught. And if they're not taught, things go horribly wrong. That's not the case with other animals. Modern human children have a slavish reliance on social learning. And when I say a psychology, I mean an evolved psychology that sets up that behavior. And when something's evolved, it's in the genome, okay? And third, we're extremely cooperative. We cooperate with unrelated individuals, which is really unique in the animal kingdom. So there's no other animal where you can put them all in a room like this. A colleague of mine, a friend, Sarah Hurdy, says, can you imagine putting 120 chimps on an airplane and opening the door in London after it's flown from Phoenix? It would just be raw meat and blood, right? We have a psychology for cooperation, which allows us to do extraordinary things, right? But it's evolved. It's in our makeup. We have emotions that have evolved to allow that to happen, that reward you for things like cooperation. And those three things create the capacity for what we call cumulative culture. And cumulative culture is our adaptation. You know, giraffe is adapted to its environment with its long neck. Other animals are mostly adapted through anatomy and physiology, but we adapt through culture. That's why we can live in the Arctic and in Africa in deserts. And once modern humans evolve cumulative culture, we can do anything. We can accomplish any possible task, short of, you know, breaking the laws of physics, and maybe that's even possible as well. So these three things are embedded in the genome, and they evolved just like anatomical traits. So behavior has evolved characteristics. That's my point. And those evolved characteristics are in our genome. Okay, so when we start talking about later human evolution, we're mostly talking about evolved behavioral traits, not anatomical traits, because the anatomical traits of modern humans evolved 800, 900,000 years ago. I'm going to focus on that one. As a scientist, one of my primary research questions is, how did this extreme cooperation evolve? Okay. So I think that the advanced cognition evolved 200,000, 195 to 130,000 years ago. So that happened first. And I think cooperation evolved around 100,000. And once we added cooperation to the human abilities, that set the stage for the great human diaspora. Okay, and I'll just explain how I think that happened. So what do we mean by extreme cooperation? I call it hyper prosociality. There are very high levels of cooperation with non-kin, the kind of things you do on a normal basis. Impossible among any other animal. There's a couple of animals that have some high levels of cooperation with non-kin. For example, orcas, killer whales. So if you do some reading, in-depth reading, you'll see they've got some interesting things that are moving them in the direction of what modern humans have. Cooperative breeding. So all modern human societies originally had formal mate exchange, what we call reciprocal exogamy. And if you read back in time, you didn't pick your mate, right? Your parents picked your mates, or elders in a society picked your mates. That's a universal characteristic of original human societies. And those abilities, what that allows you to do is form social networks and multi-level society. And what I mean by multi-level society is ethno-linguistic groups or tribes. Modern humans have ethno-linguistic groups and tribes, and no other animal has that. And I'm going to explain that in a couple minutes here. That's unique to modern humans. Okay, now that tribal structure is what we want to know. When did that evolve? Okay, now our closest living relatives are chimps, and chimps have single level society. They don't have tribes and ethno-linguistic groups. So each group of chimps, what we often call a troop, the people who study chimps call them troops, okay? Each troop is made up of maybe, 20 individuals, and every single one of them is at war with the other one. So if they come together, and you probably saw the Jane Goodall, she was the first one to see this. The chimps, every chimp group was at war with the other group, and they ambush each other and kill each other and so on. Every chimp group is at war with each other. But modern humans have hyperprosociality. We cooperate at high scales. So modern human hunter-gatherers, Stone Age people, live in groups, 20 to 30 individuals, what we call bands, but it's like a troop. And what we do is we have formal mate exchange. So individuals, normally women, leave the band by contract, by agreement. They marry somebody in an adjacent band, and that creates a bond between the bands. That's what formal mate exchange is meant for. It's meant to create contracts. I now have kin in that other group and friends and so on. And the original kinship structure of modern humans is bands linked together into tribes by formal mate exchange. We call that reciprocal exogamy. And if you ever want to read a great book about it, there's one written by Bernard Chapais. And this is the original human social structure that all humans share. Tribal structure. So humans are grouped into bands and then into tribes, which is what we mean by multi-scale society, held together by formal mate exchange. Mate exchange only happens within the tribe, not between. Conflict exists between the tribes, right? Rarely do they get along. Rarely. They speak a different language. They don't marry with each other and they contest land. That's the tribal war that has been so well documented in anthropological literature. Okay. Now, that is an evolved characteristic, right? We have to have psychological and emotional complexes evolved to allow us to operate in those conditions. And it creates this kind of group mindedness, which is why you hear people complaining about tribal behaviors. Right now, there's this explosion of tribal behaviors happening in our society. But it also gives us skills and motivations and emotional intelligence to operate as groups, right? Some people vary in their ability, right? And that. But it also causes out-group bias, which is the evolved psychological proclivity for racism. Out-group bias, right? To be biased against people who are different than you or speak a different language or whatever. These are the evolved characteristics of the psychology that we see express itself among people. Now, we can overcome it with culture, norms of behavior, and so on, which we need to be obviously working on. Okay, so hyperprosociality has both positive and negative implications. The positive implications is we're willing to make sacrifices to operate as a group. So, you know, we'll squeeze ourselves into a 27-inch chair and eat crap food for 14 hours to fly to Johannesburg to go on safari, right? We collaborate to do that. But it also causes this out-group bias against people who are different from us. And that's the origin of aggressive emotions toward other individuals who are unlike us. That's the tribal mentality, which is an evolved emotional capacity. And though I say it's evolved, I don't mean we can't overcome it. We can. If you understand enough about the psychology, you can build normative structures that gather people together to solve big problems like climate change and so on. Okay, so here's my argument. I think that multi-level society and the emotional psychological aspects of tribal structure evolved in Africa around between 200 and 100,000 years ago. Uniquely. So Neanderthals and Denisovans had the original chimp level psychology. And the reason this is significant is multi-level societies can field way more warriors than single level societies. A single level society can only put 4 or 5 warriors in the field because the group itself is only 20. Multi-level societies can put hundreds of warriors in the field because there are thousands of people connected by language and culture. And when you put those two kinds of societies in competition, multi-level society will always replace single-level society. Okay. Now, we have a number of different theories about when and where the psychology for hyperprosociality evolved. Sarah Hrdy, wonderful book, Mothers and Others. If you're looking for a great book to read, science book, this is it. She thinks that this psychological capacity for cooperation evolved primarily among women and child rearing. And she thinks it evolved way back 2 million years ago. Okay, so her hypothesis has it evolving way earlier than I think. Okay, so we disagree, but in a friendly manner. The great scientist Edward O. Wilson, who passed away just recently, he has a hypothesis, which I call the nest hypothesis. He thinks that the psychology for this evolution happened as soon as humans started building camps. And that would have been back around 2 million years ago. So his hypothesis, again, has an early evolution of this psychology. And I think the theory that Sam Bowles developed is actually the right one. And he argues, he's got a wonderful book, a couple of articles. I call it the warfare hypothesis. He argues that this psychology evolved when humans became cultural and had language, but when those groups started to have high levels of competition between groups. So he argued that competition results in conflict, and then those groups that have more cooperative individuals will expand at the expense of groups who have less cooperative individuals. So that results in the spreading of cooperative people and cooperative genes. Okay? And his argument is supported, he supports it primarily by mathematics and computer simulation. So if you're into that quantitative modeling of behavior, this is a great study for you. And that causes the spread of hyperprosocial groups. But my question is, where I built on his theory, if you read my papers, is he doesn't have a good explanation for when and why group competition develops. And that's what I'm going to add to it. And that's what I end my talk with. Okay. How did that happen? Because the problem is, in Africa, hunter-gatherers, and of course humans evolved as hunter-gatherers, they're all pretty peaceful. There's not a lot of conflict between ethnographically documented hunter-gatherers. So the great cultural anthropologist Elizabeth Marshall Thomas named her book on the Bushmen The Harmless People, because her question was, why are they so unwarlike? And this is the case with other African terrestrial hunter-gatherers, pygmies, Khoisan, Hadza. These are examples of hunter-gatherers. They don't fight with each other. They kind of avoid conflict. So if we're going to get the competition that Sam Bowles' theory requires, we have to figure out what would stimulate conflict. What would create those people, warlike people, from non-warlike people. Okay. Now, what I've argued is when people switch to resources, food resources that are dense and predictable, that triggers intergroup conflict. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but there is a very powerful theory in ecology called the theory of economic defendability. It's one of the most powerful behavioral theories we have. And that theory has proven again and again among modern animals and people, when resources are predictable, so very predictable, two axes here, predictability and density. When resources are really predictable and really dense, people draw a territorial boundary around them and fight over those resources. And so what are some examples of these resources? High quality agricultural land, right? Once people become food producers, they fight like crazy over high quality agricultural land. It's dense and predictable. Sits right here, you know where it is, and people put boundaries around it and fight. Resources like oil. The one we're going to be fighting over in the future is water, right? Dense, predictable resources trigger conflict on a regular basis. One of the most powerful theories in the world. So I've written a number of scientific papers that have asked the question, what resources in Africa are dense and predictable? Okay, because those would be the contexts under which we would see warfare begin between groups and the selection for cooperative behaviors to defend resources and fight. And when and where in human evolution did people begin to use those dense and predictable resources? Okay, and I've published a series of papers evaluating that. Now, the densest and most predictable resources for hunter-gatherers, without a doubt, are coastal resources, the intertidal zone. Rich source of protein, very high quality source of food, sits right there. You know where it is. If you know how to exploit it, it's a bonanza. And that's the resource that, the only resource in Africa that's dense and predictable. And as I've shown in my papers, when we look across the world at hunters and gatherers, the most warlike hunter-gatherers are coastal hunter-gatherers. They're at super high levels of warfare because they fight over access to the sea, right? Okay. Okay. So what's the evidence for when people started to use seafood, right? Well, that's why I began working in South Africa, because South Africa, particularly the South Coast, has the richest intertidal zone in all of Africa. That's where the coastal resources are the richest and the densest. And in my opinion, that's where we would have the conditions for the evolution of these complex behaviors, right? That's why I work there. When we pick a place to do field work, you don't just throw a dart at a map, right? You have to have a research question that's driving your choice, because as soon as you go there and you start digging, you've spent $40,000, $50,000, right? It's expensive, bringing all the people, the technology, and so on. You got to have a good reason. I picked South Africa specifically for that point. Now here's my fieldwork locality. I've been directing excavations at Pinnacle Point since 2000, so 22 years now. And the two most famous sites, and Pinnacle Point now is a world famous human evolution locality, are Pinnacle Point 13B and Pinnacle Point 5-6 that you see on this picture. And after 22 years of research, this is the span of occupation at the sites. And these sites, Bloembaas, Klassies River, Knysna, these are other famous sites on the coast of South Africa. And on that axis is time. And the ones that I've worked at are in red. So what you can see here is we've built up the longest sequence in South Africa, right? It goes all the way down to 160,000 years ago, 160,000 up to 50, where some of these other sites cover time ranges, but not that long. But the important thing is that, oops, sorry, let me go back there. If you remember, I said that the modern human lineage evolves between 200,000 and 130. So we sample that lineage, and these other sites don't. And that's one of the reasons why Pinnacle Point is so well known. There's very few sites that sample back into that time period. So this is what it looks like today. The view outside the cave. That's a view from inside the cave looking out. It's like a portal. There's my team excavating. We have state-of-the-art equipment. In fact, we have students from all over the world come to Pinnacle Point to learn the technology that we've developed. A lot of the technology we've developed. Everything is positioned with laser transits that can record things to millimetric accuracy directly to computers. I mean, there's hardly any paper on our sites. Everything is done digitally, which captures the data in high resolution. And in 2007, we published a paper in Nature. So the two most prestigious kind of general journals are Nature and Science. So when you get a paper in there, it's a big deal. This is our highest cited paper, one of the highest cited papers in human evolution. we published the earliest evidence for people eating seafood. So the first evidence we have for people shifting to a coastal diet is at Pinnacle Point at 162,000 years ago. And they were eating mussels, which many of you probably love. I love mussels on my pasta. Sea snails, that Olecroical is a big sea snail. Again, really good. You take the foot and kind of slice it up and flash fry it in garlic and wine. And that's actually a whale barnacle. That's a barnacle that only lives on the skin of whales. And they're in the cave. Now, we know people didn't have boats, so they weren't hunting whales. But what they were doing is they were scavenging wash-ups. And they would go and scavenge the blubber, the fat, and the skin, haul that back to the cave. And the evidence we have for that is the barnacle. So that barnacle is only lives on a whale. You couldn't possibly pick it up off the ground. So here's our graphic again. The only time when people get territorial, right, defend space and trigger warfare is when they have dense and predictable resources. Terrestrial African environments don't have dense and predictable resources. Those are probably pretty peaceful people. But when humans expand their diet to the coast and seafood, that is highly dense and predictable resource, and it triggers warfare, which sets up that selection regime for cooperative behaviors among tribal people, right? And creates the stimulus for the evolution of high levels of pro-sociality. So to get that between group competition, we got to have that shift. And that shift happened 160,000 years ago, minimally, right? That's always a minimal date. It's the first evidence we have. Could be 180, could be 200,000. I think it's probably around 200,000, but we haven't found a site yet. We're still looking. So the final question, what was their preferred weapon? Right? You can have cooperation, but you have to have effective weaponry. Well, we published in Nature in 2012 the earliest evidence for advanced projectile weapons. And by what I mean by advanced projectile weapons is weapons that are leverage assisted. So bow and arrow or atlatl, right? Spear thrower. And what we find is among Stone Age people, when they start using leverage assisted weapons, they miniaturize the weight of the stone tip. The stone tip has to get small. You can't have a big clunky stone tool on the end of those because you won't get any distance. And these are the stone tools that were used for those weapons. Now you might look at these and go, they're not even arrowheads, right? They don't look like arrowheads, but actually this is one of the biggest Stone Age advances that we know of, and we call it microlithic technology. Lithic is stone, micro small. Microlithic technology. Look how small they are. That's a scale in centimeters. Okay. So what is a microlithic tool? And Nature put it on the front cover. I like the title they said, A Hello to Arms. Basically what you do is you set up a particular type of core, which is what you knock the flakes off of, to produce those long, thin blades. Then you take the long, thin blade and you snap it into little pieces. And that's how big they are. Look how, that's fingers, right? You can't use that to do anything with. Rather, what you do with that is you mount it in normally bone or antler. So you put a groove in the bone and antler and you glue in the little microliths. As you can see, this is an experimental example, and those are archaeological examples. And those little miniaturized things are used as high performance, light, long throw projectile weapons. The first evidence we have for them being developed is 71,000. Actually, we've pushed it back a little bit to 74,000 years ago on the coast of South Africa. Neanderthals, Denisovans didn't have advanced projectile weapons. They only had hand-thrown spears and stabbing spears. So now you have a hominid that can hit a bug all the way at the back of that room with a projectile weapon. And their competitors can only hand throw or stab. So now humans have two advantages: bigger numbers, right, because of pro-sociality, and they have advanced projectile weapons. The most famous, I think that these were atlatls. We haven't figured that out yet, whether they're bow and arrow or atlatl. I think they were probably atlatls, and the best ethnographic record we have for atlatls are Australian Aborigines. That's a picture taken from 1914. They made the most incredible atlatls. And when I say, I use that example, hitting a bug from, 50, 60 feet, they could do that with those atlatls. Extraordinary weapon. Okay. So I think that the reason the great human diaspora happened at 70,000 years ago is because around 100,000 years ago, modern humans evolved multi-scale society. And multi-scale society was made possible by the evolution of psychological proclivities for high levels of cooperation with unrelated individuals. And Neanderthals didn't have that. And that allowed modern humans to eventually replace them, right? So modern humans are coming out of Africa with tribes, and they're meeting people like Neanderthals who only have troops. Unfair advantage. And when we put those two things together, high levels of cooperation and advanced projectile weapons like those Eskimo have right there, we can kill any animal on the planet with Stone Age technology, right? And Eskimo people, Inuit, what we call them today, that's the preferred term, killed whales with Stone Age technology and large groups. And we have evidence for modern humans in large groups and projectiles and atlatls killing mammoth and mastodon. So imagine this creature, modern humans, who can field 20 hunters, 30 warriors with advanced projectile weapons, comes roaring out of Africa, races across the planet, megafaunal extinctions. They're killing mammoth and mastodon, the biggest things on, and encountering other species. And that results in the distribution, the expansion of us across the planet and the xenocide of our cousins, Neanderthals, and their prey. Yet we have traces of that event in our DNA, because as we encountered them, we interbred with some, but they didn't survive as a group or a species. So let me summarize with one last slide. 250,000 years ago to 200,000 years ago, we have the origins of a complex cognition and our lineage in Africa. Smart, but not cooperative. That complex cognition allows an expansion into dense and predictable resources like coastal resources. And I told that story in that first Scientific American paper. Those papers are related to each other, right? The second one is a follow-up. That triggers elevated territoriality and conflict, that shift to dense and predictable resources. And that creates natural selection for hyper-prosociality and collective intentionality. Collective intentionality is the tribalistic mentality that we have. the xenophobic, right? That allows the formation of multi-scale society, bands linked into tribes, ethno-linguistic groups. That complex cognition also allows them to evolve advanced projectile weapons. And when we give the advanced projectile weapons to the tribes, boom, the out of Africa event happens. The great human diaspora is initiated. Humans rapidly move across the planet, exterminating competitors and many of the big animals that were there as prey. And that part of the story I've told in How We Conquered the Planet. Now, as you can tell, there's been many very famous discoveries made at Pinnacle Point. We've been very fortunate in that. And I think the other thing is we've told the world why they're significant. And that's created a lot of excitement. So 10 years ago, I began an initiative to have Pinnacle Point declared a World Heritage Site. 10 years ago, started. And writing a proposal for a World Heritage Site is very difficult, I learned. Because after 10 years of work, in January, the South African Parliament approved it for submission to UNESCO. So next year, our proposal will be submitted to UNESCO. We think it's a great proposal. We think that it'll get approved right away. And hopefully, in September of 2023, if your news feed gets the latest list of World Heritage Sites, Pinnacle Point, the one that you've heard about today, will be one of those. And anticipation, the South African government has already started putting together the tourism route, right? Because this is where you make the money off the foreign researchers coming to your country. And of course, they've been fabulously hospitable to me. This was my way of giving back, right? Because when you have a World Heritage Site, it creates jobs. And the unemployment rate where I work in South Africa, it's 40%, right? People need jobs. And tourism jobs are very high quality jobs. People, when you do surveys, they love it. They're outside, they're explaining the ocean, the caves, they're meeting friendly people, they're getting good tips. What a great way, I thought, to give back. So you can go to the website. The South Africans have called it the Cradle of Human Culture. So if you Google Cradle of Human Culture, South Africa, it'll take you right to the website. You'll see where the South Africans have said the tours will be that end up at Pinnacle Point. Let's hope for the best on that nomination. So I'm going to end it on that. If you have more interests, Institute of Human Origins, you can Google Institute of Human Origins, go to our website. We have a website called becominghuman.org that you can learn more about it and the other research that's done at the Institute. And of course, come by and see our new space at some time, okay? Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, I think we can take some questions. Paul's got his hand up, so.
Thank you very, very much. That was, I'm sure everybody will agree, very, very enlightening and brought information to us that is almost overwhelming. I've been interested in this for a long time, and I have two questions. The first question is that 14,000 years ago, there was a land mass between Asia and the Americas so that the diaspora could walk across.
Right.
60,000 years ago, there was no land mass between Asia and Australia. So how did they get there? That's my first question. Okay. Second question.
Well, let me take that one first, okay? Because I'll forget it. Okay. When you buy. Okay, that's a great question. And okay, so during glacial phases, sea level goes down. and during interglacial phases, sea level goes up. Even during the strongest of glacial phases, there was always ocean between Southeast Asia and Australia. There was never a land bridge. There was a land bridge between Australia and Tasmania, but not between Southeast Asia and Australia. For 50, 60 years, we thought that the first people got into Australia around 45,000 years ago. And that's turned out to be kind of a methodological artifact, because the primary dating technique we've used all these years was radiocarbon dating. And that can't go back beyond 40 to 45. So we kept getting this, it created a glass ceiling for us. And in fact, a good colleague and friend of mine, a woman named Zenobia Jacobs, she's a South African, and she does the dating of our sites. She did a lot of redating of the Australian sites with a technique that she's a big part of developing called optically stimulated luminescence dating, OSL. And what you're dating is the last time a sand grain was exposed to light. And she showed that people made it to Australia between 60 and 65,000 years ago. So she pushed it back. And then what's fascinating about that is it doesn't matter if it's at 45 or 60 or whatever. The people who made it to Australia had to have made it to Southeast Asia and then built seaworthy boats and sailed to Australia without even knowing it's there, because you can't see it, even during at a glacial maximum. So they had to put their families, we know from the genetics that it was a couple hundred people. What were they doing? I mean, humans do risky things like that to better their lives. It could have been as simple as, we know they already had boat technology. They might have been exploring or fishing and bumped into Australia, gone back and said, hey, there's a place with nobody there and we can kill the animals. Think of it this way, right? The marsupial animals, indigenous, would not have seen humans as a predator. You just walk up and kill them, right? And there's a massive extinction as soon as modern humans get there. And some of the marsupials were as big as cattle, right? Almost as big as elephants. So all those that big stuff goes extinct. There's a lot of debate over whether or not humans caused it. I think they did, but it's gotten political. So that's it. They sailed there. And we know that's how they got there. And second question.
Yeah, well, of course, and they sailed all over Asia. I mean, all over the South Pacific. Second question is that the Africans who left obviously had black skin. And when they went to Asia and to Europe and to the United States, they lost their melanin and turned white.
Right.
How and why did that happen?
Yeah, we know exactly why. So your skin synthesizes vitamin D when sunlight goes into it, and vitamin D is crucial for metabolizing calcium. Okay, so if you don't have enough vitamin D, well, you already know if you don't have enough vitamin D, you're in trouble in a lot of ways, right? Vitamin D is really important for lots of stuff. But if you don't get enough vitamin D, you'll get rickets. You simply can't process the calcium that's in the food. And vitamin D is hard to find in the ecosystem. It's really high, it's really abundant in fish, right? But, you know, not everybody's eating fish. You can get it out of the brains of terrestrial mammals, but again, it's not a big source. And black skin blocks out quite a bit of the sunlight, right? Black skin is evolved to protect your skin from high levels of radiation. But in the tropics, you can let more than enough vitamin D in for more than enough light in to produce vitamin D. But when you start to move into colder climates, two things happen. One is the amount of radiation, and it's actually UVB, ultraviolet B is the only one that's important for this. UVB is lower naturally, right? Of course, we all know this. But but also you have to cover your body with clothing because it's cold. So the selection force to lighten skin would have been really strong right away. So if you can imagine, you've got a couple thousand black folk coming out of Africa, they're under very strong selection to lighten the skin. You're going to have a lot of white folk very quickly from an evolutionary standpoint. But we also know that, so there's a depigmentation event. We know this from the genetics immediately, but then as they start to work their way back down into India and into Australia, there's selection for dark skin again, because you're getting into really high UVB areas, right? So the whole story of skin color is very well sorted out. There's a wonderful book on it. What's the name of the author? I can't. She's at Penn State in the Department of Anthropology. But if you can Google it, and the number of many scientific papers. So that's the explanation. We got that one nailed. Yeah.
Question over here. Neanderthals. Everybody in this room is 2 to 3%, just like I am, like
Right.
you probably are.
Yep.
Did we kill them? Did humans kill the Neanderthals, or did they just disappear?
That's one of the hottest debates in paleoanthropology. And if you followed my argument is a competition argument. In my opinion, modern humans came into those areas. There may have been some friendly relations, and there sometimes are, but in my opinion, modern humans probably displaced them through competition, through warfare. And modern humans, when we move into environments, we just don't tolerate competitors, right? One of the first things modern humans do is they eliminate the competition. And so Neanderthals would have been competition for food. They would have been competition for land. And often in those competitive situations, it's not pretty, right? Women are often taken by the winning group, and there's your source of introgression, right? So that's my opinion. Other colleagues of mine would disagree, right? And so we have other hypotheses. Groups can outcompete each other simply by being better at eating their food, right? So if modern humans come in with advanced projectile weapons, they might have just eaten everything that Neanderthals were eating. And you don't even have to appeal to conflict. We call that a competitive exclusion argument. There's a theory called competitive exclusion. That's a possibility. I think it probably is a little bit of both. But in my opinion, there's no way this was just a friendly encounter. Just doesn't. Knowing modern humans. Question over here.
In your comment on microlithic technology, when I first started studying origin of the language, which has been many, many decades ago, that microlithic technology was a way for early language to begin as you passed on the knowledge of tools to others in your group. And I'm just curious if you are working with other linguistic scholars as you move through the diaspora, the glacial, interglacial periods, as we move language along with these tribal groups to Europe, to Asia, and any developments that you have learned in your exploration with South Africa.
Right. So if you remember, I was talking about social learning as a really big, important part of human behavior. Well, clearly language is how social learning is really operationalized. Languages could be the most significant human adaptation we have, right? So all of that cooperation that happens between unrelated individuals and distant kin is only possible because of language, which allows the formation of kinship systems, right? Names for uncles and aunts and second cousins and all that. That's how you track it, right? Teaching individuals how to make complex technologies is facilitated by language. Now then you probably are asking, well, when did language evolve? We don't know. We don't. There's a decline across the planet and language phonemic diversity. So phonemes are the number of sounds, right? African languages have the most sounds. East Asian languages the least. And that reflects the fact that as a founding population leaves, there's a loss of diversity as you move. So the origin languages were African languages. So Khoisan languages has the most diversity in its phonemes. That's the Bushman people in South Africa. And then it declines as you go out. So the origin population had to have language, if you follow my argument. But then the question then, so 200,000 years ago, there was language, had to be. But how far back does it go? Did Neanderthals have language? We don't have answers to those questions. But we do work with linguists trying to figure this out. There's quantitative linguistics is how we try to get at some of the relationship between diversity and time, but they don't have an answer to this question.
First of all, thank you very much. This was fascinating, and I'd like to be around in 5 years to have you come back and see
What's the
what's
update?
developed since now. Well, my question has to do with longevity. Humans seem to live longer than most animals, and maturation. We start as babies and it takes 18 to 20 years for us to mature.
Right.
And that seems unique in the animal kingdom.
Yeah, some of it's unique. And that's a great question. It's a very complex one. We refer to that area of study as life history theory. Okay. Life history theory. Okay. So there are scientists who specialize in life history theory. And that is all about the speed at which organisms grow and mature and how long they live. So humans are rather unusual, I'm not going to say unique, but rather unusual in having long post-menopausal lifespans. So among most animals, there's no life after menopause. The females die. Okay. Now, that's not the case with humans. Obviously, we have these really long post-menopausal lifespans. Guess what animal also has that? Orcas. Orcas, killer whales. Yeah, killer whales have long postmenopausal lifespans. Now, so the question is why? This is it's a complex literature. I'm interested in it, so I keep up on it. We have a theory, I'm going to just call it the grandmothering hypothesis, okay? And what it poses is that because human children are unable to take care of themselves for a very long period of time, the data that we have with hunter-gatherers, it's a human can't really support themselves until they're about 15 or 16, okay? The birth spacing among hunter-gatherers is 4 years, and this is like a law. So in other words, among hunting and gathering societies, a woman has a child every 4 years. It has to do with weaning and how much food she can produce. So if you think about that, at any one time, a woman has 3 to 4 children she has to provide for, right? If you follow the math. Well, that's impossible. A woman, hunter-gatherer, cannot collect enough food to feed 3 to 4 children or more. So the grandmothering hypothesis posits that women have evolved to live long spans after menopause to collect food to provision their daughters' kids. Okay, and along with that has evolved the psychology, the grandmothering psychology, right? you probably like, why is an archaeologist keep talking about psychology? Psychology's evolved, right? We have to remember that, and it's part of human evolution. So, all you have to do is bring a baby into a group of women and everybody's like, oh, yeah. That's what I mean. That's a psychology, right? It's not because children are inherently cute or beautiful. They're cute or beautiful because you've been evolved to see them that way, which triggers an emotional response to protect it, right? So you imagine, you bring the baby in and you got the 10 women and they're all like, oh, and then some mean guy comes in. They'll tear them to pieces and don't even have to be related, right? So that's a theory that we have. Now, there was a paper published just 2 or 3 years ago. They've been working on this with orcas, right? With killer whales. I don't call them killer whales because, orcas are not whales, they're dolphins. This is high profile research because it's an unusual behavior. And this is what they've found. They have found that the training of young orcas to hunt is done by old females. So the old females are the ones that are training the young to hunt seals and other whales and so on. And they're training unrelated individuals. They're training the babies of the pack. So that creates the selection for postmenopausal lifespans of older female orcas. You follow me on that? So it's different. It's a different thing. Females, the division of labor is one of the single most important evolutionary events, right, in human history, because there's not a lot of division of labor among other animals, but humans have very strict division of labor in hunter-gatherer societies, which allows for high efficiency economics in the group. Women aren't training young children to hunt. They do train them to collect plant foods, which is more complicated than hunting actually, because most plant foods are poisonous and signaled by colors and stuff like that. So they do that, but what they do is they alloparent. Alloparenting is helping with the upbringing of unrelated individual children. Humans are the masters of that. Okay, so that's a long explanation for your question.
Do orcas have language?
That's a big question. I don't have an answer for it. Dolphins and porpoises and orcas have extraordinarily complex communication systems. We don't know if it fits the definition of language. So in other words, we don't know if it has a grammar. It's complex and it's certainly formative. That could be the formative raw material that language comes out of. So I don't have an answer.
Okay. Great questions. Well, thank you very much for an
Okay.
absolutely fascinating talk.